Hello, welcome to TV Mi Gente. Today we are going to talk about DMT, the so-called spirit molecule. This is one of the most powerful psychedelics that exist, and our guest is the most important expert in the field. He's Dr. Rick Strassman. Thank you so much, Dr. Strassman, for accepting our invitation. It is an honor to have you on our show. As I said, you are the most important, without doubt, expert internationally in this field. It is an honor to have you in our show.
Well, thank you, Peter. My pleasure.
And for those who doesn't know Dr. Strassman, from 1990 to 1995, he conducted a U.S. government approved and funded clinical research at the University of New Mexico in which he injected 60 volunteers with DMT. His detailed account of those sessions is an extraordinary revelation about the nature of the human mind and the potential of psychedelics. His best selling book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which we're going to see on the screen right now. That best-selling book was a total success internationally. It was translated into 13 languages and was the basis of a successful independent documentary that he co-produced. So we're here with the guy who knows the best about DMT. So the first question for you, doctor, is what is exactly DMT?
Um, DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine, which is a compound, relatively small, not bigger than not much larger than a sugar molecule, actually. Um, and it's found, throughout the natural world, plants, animals, including humans. It's a chemical cousin of serotonin and of melatonin, and it's quite psychedelic. It's found in ayahuasca, which is a Amazonian brew, which is quite psychedelic, and it was also studied during the first wave of psychedelic research in the West, and is a topic of major interest nowadays as well during the psychedelic renewal.
And can you talk to us about what is the effect of DMT on the human brain and mind?
Um, well, DMT is what's known as a classical psychedelic, which um, is the family of drugs that contain psilocybin and LSD, as well as mescaline, which is in the peyote cactus. They're pharmacologically quite similar. They stimulate a receptor in the brain called the serotonin 2A receptor, which is located in the parts of the brain that you would assume would be important in the psychedelic experience. Those receptors are located on brain areas that regulate mood, thinking, perception, um, physical sensations, those kinds of things. Um, and also, like other classical psychedelics, it seems to increase communication among parts of the brain that normally are not in communication with each other, which may be how one attains new insights or remembers things that were long forgotten.
And can you talk to us about the study that you did from 1990 to 1995 at the University of New Mexico, where you injected the DMT to 60 volunteers? We want to know about the results of that study.
Well, I began that study in the course of my interest in looking for a naturally occurring compound in the body that was responsible or mediated uh, non-drug experiences that resembled psychedelic experiences. So for example, would DMT or something else cause the same kinds of mental changes which occur in dreams, in psychosis, near-death experiences, spiritual states, deep meditation, or prayer. I began with my search looking at melatonin from the pineal gland. Um, because the pineal gland has a long history of being important in spiritual practice, and in the early 80s, there were some data suggesting it was psychedelic. But it in and we st- and I began my clinical research career giving melatonin and investigating its effects. It was only sedating, which we now know, but back then we didn't. Um, by then, I learned about DMT and switched careers or specializations and worked on the DMT study for 5 years. It was the first new American clinical research with classical psychedelics in a generation. So it was very important to be quite careful and very circumspect in our goals and our aims and our methodologies. Um, so it was a classic psychopharmacology study. It's what's called a dose response study. You give small doses, medium doses, big doses, and placebo, and you measure things. And in the case of DMT, we measured biological effects and psychological effects. Um, yeah, and as you note, we ran 5 dozen or so volunteers, through that study. These were not therapies, protocols. They were investigations in normal volunteers to just characterize the effects of the drug and to begin looking at the mechanisms of how those effects took place.
And my next question is, on your book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, you made a bold statement, which is very brave. You said that the DMT, which is also naturally released from the pineal gland, uh, can facilitate the movement of the soul in and out of the body. I have I have done the DMT, and I have felt that. I can attest that that is true. That is completely true. My
Oh, good.
soul travel out and in of my body. But how do you prove that scientifically? How do you convince the scientific community that that is true? Because I know that is true because I felt that. But to the people who only believe in science, how do you prove
Mhm.
it?
Well, a couple of things. One is when I wrote my protocols and applied for funding, from the National Institutes of Health, from the NIH, um, and permission from FDA and the DEA. I couldn't really talk about the soul, even though I was thinking about it, but still, it wasn't something that would have been appropriate to include in a study that was intended to measure prolactin and beta on beta endorphin, pupil diameter, questionnaire answers on a rating scale. Um, you know, but still, that was the implicit or the hidden agenda that I had. Was what's the spiritual relevance of DMT and of the DMT state? What is this compound doing in the human brain? Um, I came upon that theory in a scholarly or an academic manner in the first place. Um, and it had to do with the formation of the pineal gland in the fetus at 49 days of gestational age. Um, the pineal gland is formed at the same time in the embryo as occurs um, the differentiation of the genders into either male or female. And I thought there obviously is a relationship between spirituality, gender, sexuality, the sexual experience. So 49 days is also the time period during which a number of Eastern religions propose that the soul um, travels after death before deciding on the next body to reincarnate in. So I kind of tied these all together and thought, I wonder if the pineal production of DMT at 49 days corresponds to the entry of the soul into that individual body. Um, the notion of DMT being involved in the exit of the soul at the time of death. That's that was both empirical and based on academics. The empirical is your description. You smoke DMT and it feels as if you're dying, and your consciousness or your soul is leaving your body. um, so that's one group of evidence, or one piece of data. The other is you uh, there is DMT made in the brain. We know that for certain uh, now. There was a paper came out in 2019, and concentrations are high, and they become even higher in the brain during death, especially in the visual cortex, the visual part of the brain. So there's academic support now that DMT may be involved in some of the aspects of the near death experience, especially the visual ones. um, so if what you are seeing when you die, the very last things that you see are the result of elevated levels of brain DMT, uh, you know, that corresponds to the exit of the soul from the body.
Also, what I found very interesting about the book is the volunteers described communication with aliens, intelligent presences that are non-human, angels, spirits. Uh, can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, that was one of the strangest, parts of the results of my studies, and it ought not to have surprised me, because I had smoked, DMT before, and I encountered beings with whom I communicated, and I interviewed about 20 people, before starting my study, in order to get a lay of the land, what to expect um, in the volunteers after being given DMT. And almost all of them described encounters with these beings, uh, huge Buddha statues or elves, or geometric figurines, or whatnot. But still, um, in some way, or in some manner, it
Also,
was hard. It was hard, to get around, or to get my head around, the idea that people would encounter beings with whom they interacted. But that occurred in at least 50, 60% of the volunteers, and they took all forms, shapes, sizes. Cactus, insects, machines, furniture, humanoid robots. And even if there weren't discreetly observable beings, there was still an intelligence that seemed to permeate the space into which the volunteers entered.
and do you think those presences, those intelligent non-human contacts, they are real, or that parallel universe do exist, or is only an imagination, a creation of our mind, or is something that really exists that we travel to there only when we are on those psychedelics?
Well, that's a big question, right? If they are objectively real, freestanding, independent, they exist independent of us. Where do they reside? Are they in outer space, or are they in some invisible, level of reality that we don't, normally perceive, like parallel universes or dark matter? Um, or are they just your brain on drugs? Like these, drugs stimulate the visual cortex, and this is what you see, or some combination thereof, like the, DMT, changes the tuning of your brain chemically, uh, and as a result, you're able to peer into freestanding objective reality. or alternative ones. We really can't decide that right now. The thing I'm more comfortable nowadays talking about is that psychedelics, and in particular DMT, reveal things that were previously invisible. So that applies to the mind, your unconscious. It may apply to parallel levels of reality, but at this point we really can't you know uh, locate the location of those beings. That being said, I think the more important thing, at least at this point in our history, I think it's more important to gain whatever information we can from the beings who are appearing to us. To hone our skills in being able to extract information from those states, and understand that information, and then apply it, you know, um, uh, communicate it, whatnot. So the meaning, I think, of the visions is more important right now, than where they reside.
So for a person like me and yourself, we both have done the DMT. I don't have a doubt, you shouldn't, I guess, that when we die, our soul continues the trip. That we die, but we continue. Uh, where do you think our soul goes when we die? What's next?
Where does our soul go after we die? Well, you can ask a million people and you'd get a million different answers. What do I think? Well, when I first began, considering that question, the first answer which I received was fairly satisfying. It was from my Zen teacher, and she spoke about individual lives like lit up light bulbs. There's electricity that runs through the light bulb, and as a result of the electricity being in the light bulb and illuminating it, there are certain things which happen to that light bulb, and to the electricity which passes through it. And then after you die, the light bulb goes out, so to speak. That electricity continues. It's dispersed. So that could be part of an explanation for past life memories or whatnot, is that the imprinting, let's say, of or onto the electrons of the the light bulb, that was you, continues, and lands in other light bulbs. Since then I've returned to my Jewish roots, and are exploring and am exploring some of the Jewish ideas regarding the soul. There isn't really that much spoken about the soul, at least in the Hebrew Bible. There is in Kabbalah, and you know th- uh, the rabbinic writings, but in the Hebrew Bible on itself, there really isn't much spoken of, with respect uh, to the soul, to the afterlife. Um, if you believe that that your soul comes from God, the Creator, then I think it's fair to say, or to speculate, that it returns to God, the Creator. But these are theological questions, metaphysical questions, for which we don't quite yet have the technology to address in a scientific manner.
Why do you think DMT is illegal in the US?
Well, all of these compounds were illegalized in 1970 with the passage of the Controlled Substances Act. And that's because there was a public health emergency occurring at the time. Kids who ought not to have been taking psychedelics were, let's say, people with mental illness, or uh, a history of mental illness, or in unstable circumstances, in combination with other drugs and the wrong circumstances. And there were a lot of suicides. lots of accidents. One of my high school friends, went to Las Vegas, took LSD, thought he could fly, jumped out of the window and died. Lots of hospitalizations and emergency room visits and all kinds of stuff. So it was a public health emergency, and something had to be done. So they scheduled these compounds into Schedule 1. It's ironic. It didn't really stop the use of these drugs. They, just went underground, and people stopped, talking about them. The unintended consequence was that all research dried up at the same time. Human research anyway. Um, you know, uh, Studies in animals continued, and yielded much of what we know about serotonin and antidepressants and psychotic agents now. But human studies ended. And in the States, our first, like our, DMT, project was the first new study since 1970. Um, these compounds are still Schedule 1, which requires a lot of paperwork in order, to get approval, to study in humans. It isn't impossible, but it's a lot of legwork. And I think with the increasing popularity of these compounds, again within science, and the promising early results for DMT and other compounds in depression and alcoholism and PTSD and things, that there will be a rescheduling or a bifurcated scheduling. In other words, they'll stay Schedule 1, for illegal use or for off-label use, so to speak, but they can be used in clinical research and in therapeutic contexts.
If I say that, I will say that my opinion was that it is illegal because the system doesn't want us to think out of the box, out of the matrix. Is that is that an statement that is possible, or that's being a conspirator?
Well, I think it isn't quite accurate. Because I think what psychedelics do is they make what's already in your mind, which is more or less conscious at the time. It makes things more meaningful and more true. One of the most common refrains of our volunteers once they came out of the state was, "It felt more real than real." So you can have ideas or feelings or solutions to problems which are kind of rattling around in your head. You think it may be the case, you think it might not be, you're just not sure. And you take a drug that then really makes more meaningful and more convincing and more true what you weren't quite sure about. You're more dedicated to those ideas and those feelings. So I think what happened in the 60s is that there was a lot of social unrest. The war was becoming a memory. Well, World War II was becoming a memory. The Vietnamese War was just crazy. Sexual liberation was around the corner. Richard Nixon, was the president, and there was a lot of unhappiness and a lot of change. And I think what psychedelics did was fuel that revolution, rather than cause it. I think that the people were much more convinced of ideas which were out of the box, which they had been vaguely entertaining, but as a result of their LSD experiences, were completely convinced of of their truth. And rather than these drugs creating new ideas which were a threat, they rather magnified and amplified those ideas which were already a threat.
Perfect. We're gonna go to a quick break and we'll be back.
La clínica Corazón en Forma nació de la necesidad de servir a una comunidad tremendamente afectada por problemas del corazón, diabetes y obesidad. Estamos ubicados en el Alto Manhattan, en Washington Heights, donde la población muere por problemas cardíacos 3 veces más que en la misma ciudad pero un poco más al sur. Hemos creado servicios de excelencia, siguiendo los protocolos científicos adecuados, pero manteniendo al paciente dentro de su cultura, con su mismo idioma, su comida y su idiosincrasia. Nuestra meta es promover un corazón en forma, sin perder nuestras hermosas raíces latinas.
Welcome back to this fascinating show about DMT, the so-called spirit molecule. We are talking about that topic with Dr. Rick Strassman. He's the author of the best-selling book DMT, the spirit molecule, and he did an amazing study from 1990 to 1995 at the University of New Mexico, where he injected 60 volunteers with DMT, and the results were amazing. So let's talk now about the ayahuasca. The ayahuasca, we know, is a way to get the DMT. It's a beverage from El Amazonas. Explain a little bit what is ayahuasca.
It's a combination of two plants. One contains DMT, and one contains an inhibitor of the enzyme in the gut that normally breaks down DMT. If you swallow DMT all by itself, it's broken down in the stomach and the small intestine before it's able to cross into the blood and then into the brain. And it's metabolized by an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, MAO. And by some amazing, miraculous feat of psychopharmacology, the natives in the Amazon decided to combine these two plants. Like there's a lot of plants in the Amazon, and how they figured to combine these two plants to make an orally active form of DMT is anybody's guess. If you ask them, they will tell you that the plants spoke to them and told them. But yeah, it's an amazing feat. So you can. It's a brew. It's a combination of these two plants, which are steeped and boiled and decanted over and over. Yeah, it's a muddy, smelly, bad tasting brew. Usually, it can be sweet, but usually it makes you kind of sick to your stomach. It's a strong flavor. Um, so you drink it, and the effects begin within a half hour or an hour, as opposed to if you smoke or inject pure DMT begins within a couple of heartbeats. Um, Pure DMT, if smoked, begins that quickly. Is the peak effects are in a minute or two, maybe three, and are over by 15 or 20. When you drink ayahuasca, the effects begin 30 to 60 minutes. They peak at around maybe 2 to 3, and then you're pretty normal by 4 to 5 hours afterwards. The effects that themselves, or the psychological effects of ayahuasca and of pure DMT, are quite similar. I've drunk a fair amount of ayahuasca, and if you drink enough, it's a full-on DMT experience. The extra plant material, the MAO inhibiting plant, has got its own set of effects, and that could be the reason that people purge when they drink ayahuasca. It's often called the purge, el purgo. Because you vomit, you have diarrhea, you sweat. It can be fairly demanding physically. But psychologically, the effects in your brain and your mind are quite similar to pure DMT. It's been used in Latin America for for millennia, for thousands of years, and is used for all kinds of things, for healing, for locating lost objects, for hunting, for spiritual purposes. Um, so it wasn't discovered until the 1850s or so. And over the last 30 40 years or so, it's become quite popular. There's this whole business in Latin America that's referred to as ayahuasca uh, tourism. So people fly into the Amazon or Peru or Costa Rica, and they drink ayahuasca with a shaman in a more comfortable setting, or an uncomfortable setting. Uh, depending on the context. Yeah, and you are worked on, and then you go back to your normal job, which can be quite jarring if you're not prepared for the transition back into the West.
And what about the Bufo alvarius? Like we know it's the animal in Mexico that can also be another source of DMT. Explain a little bit about the Bufo.
Yeah, well, so bufo is a toad, and it contains in its venom glands a compound called, which is called 5-methoxy DMT. It's quite similar to DMT, but but it is a different compound. It's 5-methoxy DMT, um, and it's a great story regarding its discovery. One of our volunteers actually, Nils, DMT number 6, was a real a very smart guy, and was an amateur chemist, and he just was very keen on discovering new psychedelic compounds. Um, and he went to the and he spent a lot of time at the library, looking at very obscure uh, journal references, and he came across 5-methoxy DMT, and nobody knew anything about it, whether it was safe or not safe, psychedelic or not. And there's quite a few of these toads in the Sonoran Desert around Tucson, and they like irrigation ditches. So he just got into his car, drove down to Tucson from from Texas, found some of these toads, squeezed their venom gland, squirted out the venom onto his windshield, scraped the windshield with his credit card, and then put it in his pipe and smoked it. Uh, and he completely tripped out, and he discovered 5-methoxy DMT. So that's the story of its discovery. Um, it's more potent than straight DMT. Like the active like an active dose of uh, smoked DMT is maybe 30 to 50 milligrams. But the active dose of 5-methoxy is 3 to 5 milligrams, maybe 10 milligrams at most. But it's very easy to overdose on 5-methoxy, because it is more difficult to measure out those kinds of small weights. The experience is rather different as well. Whereas the DMT experience is full of content. There's things there. You see them, you interact with them. There's visions. You maintain your sense of self. You're able to interact with the contents of that state. Time and space pass or exist, although in a highly altered form, but still they do. 5-methoxy DMT is more of the the white light ego death kind of state. It's just like you're in the middle of the sun. There isn't any differentiation. There's no more sense of self. No more time or space. You know, um, if you go on YouTube and you watch people smoking 5-methoxy, they often flop around on the ground, and they have to be restrained. They sing, they scream, they bounce around, and they often do not recall what happened. And there's a lot of flashbacks with 5-methoxy, especially waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like you're back on a 5-methoxy experience. So even though it's being studied as a psychotherapeutic drug, I think its side effects are just going to be a bit too much for most people to handle. Also, there is a review paper recently indicating, that it may be epileptogenic. In other words, it may cause seizures, um, and so that's not going to be an especially strong selling point either. So I think it's a pharmacological curiosity, for the very brave-hearted, but I think as far as an antidepressant or um, anti substance abuse kind of compound, it's not going to see much currency.
So do you think ayahuasca is safer, much safer? Right?
Yeah, ayahuasca, there's no known deaths from drinking pure ayahuasca. It's been around thousands of years. People in the Amazon, Peru, Costa Rica, or Guatemala, they drink ayahuasca, 2, 3 times a week for 30, 40, 50 years, and they look pretty healthy. So I don't think there's going to be any, significant toxicity. There's one, kind of, red herring out there about ayahuasca, or, about exposing yourself, frequently, to any psychedelic, uh, which is uh, their effect on what's called the 1B receptor, of the serotonin 1B receptor, uh, which is on the heart valves. And back in the day, there was a diet pill called fenfluramine, phentyramine, and the combination affected uh, the 1B receptor on the valves and was causing some heart valve problems. So there's some concern. Well, microdosing, let's say, or ayahuasca on a regular basis, might cause those you know uh, you know uh, might cause those potential problems with the heart valves. But a simple study to do, to dispel that concern would, be to do echocardiograms on the hearts of these ayahuasqueros who've been drinking, ayahuasca their whole lives on a regular basis. I've not heard any stories of, heart disease resulting from, regular ayahuasca intake. So I think it could be, something, that the media picks up, or anti, psychedelic, scientists you might start picking up. But I think at a practical level, it's not going to turn out to be an issue.
And what are the benefits of taking DMT, like ayahuasca, for example? Because in the US it's not legal, but if someone is thinking of going to El Amazonas to do the ayahuasca or to another country, it's apart from having a connection with those entities, with those parallel universes, is there any other benefit for your mental health, for your spirituality, for your consciousness?
hmm Well, the ultimate outcome of any psychedelic experience is a combination of three factors. One is the one is, the setting, and one is, the drug, or, more particularly the dose of the drug. The set is, who you are at the time that you take a psychedelic, your mental state, your spiritual state, your physical state, your friends, your family, just, who you are. What you want out of the experience is also part of your set. That's something that you can call your intent. So do you want to be a better person? You want to be more spiritual? You want your depression to go away? At the same time, do you want to be like, I'm a serial killer? Like, Charles Manson, back in the 60s, gave a lot of LSD to his followers, who were sociopaths. They didn't like society. They felt hard done by, and Manson had these unusual ideas, and he fed them these ideas, and fed them LSD, and as a result, they were dedicated serial killers. So that that was their intention. that was their intent. Those were the kind of people that they were, and those were the kinds of things that they were interested in accomplishing and becoming. So the set is very important. Who you are and what you want out of the experience. The setting is everything else. Like who you're with. Are you by yourself, with one person, with a bunch of people, with friends, with enemies? Is it in a research environment? Is it on a meditation retreat? Is it at a rave? Is it in Manhattan during rush hour? Is it in the jungle? Um, are you, do you feel, safe and comfortable? And, what do they think about psychedelics? Why are they giving them to you? Why are they taking them with you? Do they want to help you, or do they want to harm you, or do they want to take advantage of you? So, the set and the setting are crucially important. If you want if you want to become more spiritual, for example, you live your life in as spiritual a manner as you can. And when you enter into decision to take a psychedelic, formulate the questions and the goals of that experience using your framework. What are the kinds of questions you want to answer? Like, how can I be closer to God? How can I be more, God-like? How can I, treat my fellows with more love? So those are the things that you bring to the trip, and then in the psychedelic state, those are the things that the drug is working on. If you bring a whole nother set of ideals and goals and aspirations, then those are what the drug is working on. So and then the dose, small dose, medium dose, or big dose, and that depends how functional you want to be at the moment, and how deep or uh, uh, shallow you want to take the experience. Obviously, when you're a newcomer, you want to take it easy. You could dive into the deep end, but I think it makes more sense to enter these realms carefully.
I have done the psychedelics lastly, like vinculating or mixing them with meditation and breathing, strong breathing exercises. And when I did it while breathing a lot, like the Wim Hof and another exercises, and while meditating, for me it has been stronger. Is there any science behind that? Why it was stronger for me?
Well, there's a couple of possibilities. One is that we know there is DMT in the brain, and it makes sense that if you are doing techniques that bring on states that resemble those of taking DMT, then it makes sense that naturally occurring DMT elevations are playing a role in that non-drug state that resembles a drug state. So, example, for example, breathing, meditating, sleep deprivation, drumming, those kinds of things. Um, and the magnification or the amplification of everyday mental contents, I think, can be extended to amplification and magnification of altered states that occur without drugs. So if you're meditating, you can meditate more intensely. Um, your meditation is more meaningful, more true, deeper, more profound. If you're doing yoga, if you're doing breath work, all those things become more, I guess, fulsome. They take on a lot more impressive and profound character.
Also, uh, I remember I read a book that is called Fantastic Fungi: How Mushrooms Can Heal shift consciousness and save the planet. Do you think DMT can save the planet too? Because that's a bold statement.
DMT can save the planet. I don't think DMT on itself can save the planet. Well, people like to joke about if only Donald Trump took LSD, he'd become a nice guy. And I think, boy, I wouldn't want to give Donald Trump LSD, and I wouldn't want to be around him on LSD. So it's set and setting. What is DMT being used for? It can make the world become a lot worse if people are using it, to manipulate others, to devise evil schemes. So it all depends on the set and setting. If you're an activist and you smoke DMT, you might become an even more dedicated activist. Although there's no guarantee, you may decide it's all illusion and what's the point. We were talking about spirituality. One of my volunteers, was a very devout Catholic, and he was in the DMT study, and he just gave up gave up his religion. He didn't think that God had anything to do with this world. There was there wasn't any point in believing, because it made no difference. So it can go either way. Set and setting is, I think, even more important than the drug itself. The drug just amplifies and makes more compelling things which are already in your mind.
We're gonna go to our last break, and we will be back very quick.
La Clínica Corazón en Forma nació de la necesidad de servir a una comunidad tremendamente afectada por problemas del corazón, diabetes y obesidad. Estamos ubicados en el Alto Manhattan, en Washington Heights, donde la población muere por problemas cardíacos 3 veces más que en la misma ciudad, pero un poco más al sur. Hemos creado servicios de excelencia, siguiendo los protocolos científicos adecuados, pero manteniendo al paciente dentro de su cultura, con su mismo idioma, su comida y su idiosincrasia. Nuestra meta es promover un corazón en forma, sin perder nuestras hermosas raíces latinas.
Welcome back to this fascinating show about DMT with Dr. Rick Strassman, the most important expert internationally on this field, author of a lot of books. Like, for example, this one we have on stage, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, has been translated into 13 languages and is the basis of an outstanding documentary that he co-produced. Doctor, I have one more question. Also, someone is asking a question. Abraham Salazar is saying, great interview so far. Lots of information. Thank you. So I have one more question. What is the main difference between psychedelic mushrooms, DMT and LSD regarding the intention of what your objective is, what you want to find if in your life, and what direction should you go?
Well, pharmacologically, how those compounds work on in the brain, they are quite similar. As I mentioned early on, they all activate the same receptor in the brain. DMT is naturally occurring, and LSD is a synthetic compound, made in the lab. Psilocybin mushrooms, contain psilocybin, and that's the active ingredient. You can synthesize psilocybin in a lab, and it is fairly much like a psilocybin mushroom. Although some people might argue that there are other compounds in the mushrooms that change the property of the experience, but psilocybin is the main ingredient in psilocybin mushrooms. Um, so the duration of action is rather different. If you smoke DMT, the whole duration might be 20, 25 minutes. Psilocybin, 48 hours, 6 to 8 hours, let's say. LSD, 10 to 12 hours, even longer if it's a big dose. So the time course, differs. The subjective effects are, pretty similar. Um, there was a a German study, yeah, or Swiss, I think a Swiss study, not long ago, that compared LSD with psilocybin. They gave some volunteers LSD, then they came in later and gave them some psilocybin, and on questionnaires anyway, there was no difference in the subjective effects. The only difference was the length of the experience. So with respect, to intent, I think the drugs all work in the same manner. They magnify, amplify, make more convincingly true things that are already kind of rattling around in your mind. With DMT, smoked DMT or injected DMT, you don't have a lot of time to work on the material. You're in that state. You just are hanging on. You orient yourself there. You might have some insights or experiences, but then you start coming down rather quickly. Um, we did a study giving it 4 times in a morning, with half-hour intervals, and people were able to do more psychological or spiritual work in that kind of model. And there's a couple of groups now in the world that are infusing DMT over the space of an hour or even 90 minutes, to keep you in that space, like a like an intravenous drip, 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 drip. You're on DMT all that time. So in a way, it'll be a 60-minute DMT experience or a 90-minute one. So that would be a lot closer, or at least in the ballpark of the duration of psilocybin or of LSD. You can get your bearings. You can bring questions to mind. You can look for answers. You can communicate with the intelligence that seems to pervade the space, or uh, to inhabit the space. Yeah, so I think the main differences would be the duration, rather than the pharmacology producing any difference in the ultimate outcome.
And which one do you think is the safest in terms of side effects? Which one is the safest for the organism? The
The
field.
safest, boy. What do you mean physically?
Yeah, physically, in terms of physical consequences to your body, which one is
Mhm.
safest? Mushrooms, DMT, or LSD?
Well, if somebody asked, yeah, what would I say? Well, they're all safe, to be honest. Smoking DMT will raise your blood pressure and your heart rate. So that's a concern. But oral DMT in ayahuasca, well, yeah, that lowers your blood pressure and heart rate, and you'll be vomiting. So I suppose DMT, like either smoked or an ayahuasca, it carries some risks, although they're pretty slight. Psilocybin, um, it's a natural compound. It occurs in nature. Uh, and LSD, it's an ergot. Um, and ergots have got a host of things that they do in people. So I suppose if I needed to decide which would be most safe physically, it would be psilocybin.
The psychedelic mushrooms, right? The ones
Yeah,
that have
but you
side
need to
effects.
be very, but obviously you need to be, careful. Like, is it really psilocybin mushroom as opposed to something else? And are they fresh and, or, pure, no contamination, no mold, those kinds of things. But, pure psilocybin is quite safe. And if you have a reliable producer of the mushrooms, I would think that they're safe too. There's no, it's interesting. There's no head-to-head comparison yet of the mushroom as opposed to pure psilocybin. I think there's a study being formulated about that at the University of Washington right now, but it isn't underway. So we still don't really know, like the exact correspondence between pure uh, um, psilocybin and the mushroom.
Abraham Salazar, he's asking a question. He says, "Would you recommend these practices to people? If so, which would you recommend and why?" I know this is a difficult question because it is illegal in the US. But if you can recommend it to someone to travel to El Amazonas or to Mexico, where they can do it without any legal consequences, he's asking if would you recommend it to which people and why. Mhm.
Well, the main thing is, due diligence. Check out any place that you are interested in. I mean, I can't, recommend any place or, not recommend any place, but there are, quite a few retreat centers in Peru and Costa Rica, Brazil. So yeah, you should really, do your background check. Find out any salacious details. Is the shaman or the leader a nice guy? Does he practice virtue, or is he or she somebody that takes advantage of the retreat participants? um, what kind of screening do they do? What kind of follow-up do they do? What are the accommodations? What kind of help do they provide if you return home and are kind of destabilized? um, Read the reviews online. Yeah, so buyer beware is the main thing I recommend when it comes to these retreat centers.
I know we are. It is five. We're running out of time, but I want you to talk about the other books that you have apart from DMT, the Spirit Molecule. Mention to our audience the other books that you have, where they can find those books, and what are they about.
Well, I have a number of books out. It's starting to be difficult to remember how many. The DMT book came out in 2001, January. Then I co-authored a book called Inner Paths to Outer Space with some colleagues, and it emphasizes the entity contact experience from a number of different perspectives. From the perspective of the ayahuasca culture, I the sci-fi community was interested in obviously the alien connection, some of the metaphysics involved, and that came out in 2006, I think. Inner Paths to Outer Space. The next book I wrote was DMT and the Soul of a Prophecy, which compares the DMT experience to the experiences of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible. And I compare and contrast those two. And I use that comparison to hypothesize, that, the visions and the voices of the Hebrew prophets back in the day, were the result of elevated brain levels of DMT. Not that they smoked DMT or ate DMT, but that prophecy from God, to the human mind, the visions were mediated, by elevated levels of brain DMT. The next book I wrote was Joseph Levy Escapes Death. It's rather a black humor kind of sardonic account. It's what's called um, it's what's called an autobiographical novel. Everything which occurred in it is true, and every thought that the character had, I had. But still, it's a slice, and that's my autobiographical novel. Came out in 2019. Uh, Joseph Levy Escapes Death. And then in 2022, I published this book on the Psychedelic Handbook,
Oh, wow.
which is a small, succinct, very dense, uh,
Mhm.
just a guidebook. What are psychedelics? What do they do? How do they do it? What are they good for? What are the side effects? The longest chapter in this book is called "How to Trip." In other words, how do you get ready? How do you manage your experience? How do you integrate it afterwards? And I'm currently uh, working on the editing of a new book, which ought to come out this year. It's not quite, we haven't quite settled on the title yet, but it's an account of my own experiences from psychedelics, cannabis, from alcohol, meditation, stress, depression, psychoanalysis, what have you. And it's illustrated. It's pretty intense, but I think uh, it will end up being a good read. Um, it's currently called Altered States, but my publisher thinks that there's just way too many books out there called Altered States. So I came up with a new title last night called "What Is This?" with a question mark. So I think as you begin entering into these realms, the first question you have is, what is this?
Exactly.
So I think
Yeah.
that's hopefully going to be the working title.
And my last question, this one is very personal. I will describe to you what psychedelics has meant to me, to my life, how it has changed, how they have changed my life. And I would like you to express on a personal level how psychedelics has changed your life, what has improved. So in my personal case, it eliminated at once all depression, anxiety. It was incredibly effective, and I feel I'm a better human being. I feel more connected to my essence, to my ancestors, I'm connected to an intelligence that is universal, a universal intelligence that has all the answers that I want. And it's yeah, and yeah, we all the time say, what is this? What is this intelligence? How do they know the answer? Who is answering that to me? Is that God? Who is it? But there is an universal intelligence that has the answers, and everybody who does psychedelics, they know what I'm talking about. So also it has been I am living in the present time. I don't think anymore about the future. I don't stress about the future. I don't think about the past. I I think everything will be fine. So my life have changed drastically. Like I'm a new person. Like the old Peter died, and I'm a new person. It's fantastic. In your case, can you describe how it works?
What do you mean in my case?
Yeah, when you took psychedelics, how it changed your life, your personal life, not the professional life, your personal life.
Uh, well, let's start with the professional because personally it's a little more complex. But professionally, I like the first time I smoked cannabis, it was actually hashish. I had never been drunk before the like a month before that, and never smoked anything until I was 17 or 18. Yeah, and the first time I smoked hash, I felt calm. I wasn't self-critical. I was happy. All those things were new. totally new. And purple clouds were coming out of my speakers. I was listening to Santana, and I thought, what is this?
Yeah.
And the answer was, well, it's chemistry. It's like I smoked this; it's in my lungs, in my brain, and now these things are happening. And I started, I started college as a chemistry major. I wanted to make fireworks and bombs, but I was discouraged. But in the meantime, I maintained my interest in chemistry and altered states and excitement and things, bright colors. Yeah, so I was hooked in a way. I'm at that point, like I want more of these experiences, and I want to understand, how they come about, and I want to apply them, for the greater good. So that kind of steered me, going into I'm into medicine and psychiatry and into clinical research. The first time I smoked the first time I smoked DMT, um, these um, these beings appeared, and were asking me over and over again, "What do you?" Uh, they were asking me, "Now do you see? Now do you see? Now do you see?" Just over and over and over again. And I switched, fields. I got out of melatonin that next week and started the paperwork to get my DMT study off the ground. Uh, Personally, I don't think I ever would have gotten involved in meditation or Buddhism if it weren't for some of the insights and the new perspectives which I underwent on psychedelics and other mind-altering substances. And most of the monks that I spoke with at the monastery, whose supervision I trained under, got their start, their first view of a possibly enlightened life under the effects of LSD. So I wasn't alone in being drawn to the East after psychedelic experiences, and I studied Zen, practiced Zen for over 20 years. Um, my friends have been explorers of consciousness. So my social network has always been heavily influenced by those experiences. um I would like, I'm not sure if I would call myself a spiritual person, but to the extent that psychedelics pointed or emphasized to me the importance of spiritual questions. I suppose one could say that they have helped me in my spiritual path. um and also they kind of showed me what they couldn't really do. Like I was part of a research uh group in New Mexico for a while, and we were taking old psychedelics, obscure ones, brand new ones, and after a while I was just having the same trip over and over. It was this drug, that drug, another drug. It was the same trip. And I just one day said, I don't need drugs. I need therapy. So I, began, seeing a therapist for, 4 years, psychoanalysis, like on the couch for, multiple days a week, for, 4 years. So I think if pay attention, drugs or, psychedelics, can also tell you, when you don't really need them anymore, or when it is time to uh, you know uh, I, I guess change their record.
After so many years researching, what is the big question that you still have been able to answer yet? What is in your mind that you are frustrated that I have been investigating this my whole life and I don't have this answer? What would be that big question?
Uh, well, I think I understand what uh, psychedelics are doing, and how. Um, so I suppose the main question, and I can't answer it, and I don't think anybody can at this point. God only knows, or only God knows is the more accurate way to put it. What's what is going to be the future of psychedelics? Um, are they going to just blow up like they did in the '60s, and disappear, like, for another, 20 years, will they, at least, help, uh, well, would they at least, help, bring about, um, more peace, more compassion within the human race. Um, how will they be used? I suppose is the main question, and there's a lot of competing interests. There's media, there's commercial interests, pharma, academics. Uh, there's indigenous. Important questions which are more or less not being addressed. Um, yeah, yeah, so there's a lot of competing interests. There's a lot of people jockeying for position in influencing the ultimate outcome. Ralph Metzner was a psychologist. Worked with Tim Leary back at Harvard, and I was part of a little group that met maybe 10, 15 years ago, and we were talking about legalizing psychedelic churches, and I was saying, oh, it's just a matter of paperwork, and you can do it. Is uh, you need to be methodical, and uh, it. Um, I mean, it can be done. So Ralph, got up and he said, "No, keep it underground. The underground is working fine. There's no big, there's no drug companies jockeying for the newest drug. There's no academics posturing for the most publications and grants. There's no shenanigans when it's kept underground. There's peer review. You can ask around who's good, who's bad, and he said just keep it underground. And I was kind of young and brash at the time, and I said, oh no, human nature is such that we'll make the most of it if it's above board, and everybody can do it, and talk about it freely. But I think there may have been more than meets the eye to Ralph's recommendation. I think the underground, if this current wave of enthusiasm, if it breaks, I think there still will be an underground, and it may not be that our culture, our society, our species are really ready for the kinds of mind altering effects these drugs can bring about.
Yeah, I have like 20 more questions. We should do another show. I would like to do a lot of shows with you because these conversations have been fascinating. But the last one, now I promise this is the last one. Do you think that there is a relationship between God and psychedelics?
A relationship between God and psychedelics. Well, I mean, if you want to get closer to God, I think you can, if that's your goal in life and the goal of your trip. Um, if you believe in God as the creator and sustainer of existence, then God created and sustains the presence of psychedelic compounds. Um, Prophecy, which is my spiritual platform these days, is communication between man and God, and the the visions, and the voices of the prophetic state, I think, have got something to do with the release of endogenous DMT. Um, so that being said, you could say that God designed the brain in order for us to communicate with it or him or with God. But like anything, uh, these drugs can be misused. So if you want to get if you want to get closer to Satan, if you believe in God, you have to believe in a comparable force of evil. So if you want to get closer to God, you could also use psychedelics to get closer to evil, to Satan. that's what Charles Manson used them for. So if you want to be a godly person, then psychedelics can help. If you want to be a more satanic person, psychedelics can help.
Perfect. There is a comment here. It says, from my perspective, the DMT subject has diminished quite a bit these days. What do you think of that comment?
Uh, can you repeat that? I didn't quite
Yeah,
catch it.
the person says, from my perspective, the DMT subject has diminished quite a bit these days.
Oh, I don't think that's the case at all.
No.
There's those two studies which are using the infusion, like the 60 to 90-minute infusion. So that is a breakthrough. There's one study from Yale giving DMT to depressed people without much therapy. They got better like within like an hour. There's a number of drug companies that are looking at DMT for depression. Either orally active or a patch or a lozenge in your tongue or in your cheek. There's interest in using DMT for stroke, for brain damage, for TBI, for dementia. So within the research community, there's like an ever increasing amount of interest. Within the psychedelic community, uh, it's pretty steady.
Thank you so
And
much.
especially, yeah, and especially with respect to ayahuasca, more and more people are drinking ayahuasca. So the toad, 5-methoxy, DMT. I think that may just be a flash in the pan. So but DMT, think has got staying power.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strassman, for this wonderful interview. I would like to have you on the show frequently because this topic is fascinating and our audience is asking and asking. And we are all bilingual, the Latino community in the US, so we can understand you perfectly. And I'm sure they will appreciate this information. Thank you so much, and we will have you soon again if you want.
Okay. Well, thanks, Peter. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.